Thank you, Zach, for your kind introduction, and thank you, Kamila, as well. She really explained and introduced you what we're going to discuss in our panels, and we have an amazing set of panelists basically to discuss the issues raised as who are the gatekeepers of news, what's the role, is the traditional media fading, how are we adapting, if we are adapting to the ever-changing environment of media, and the role of influencers and algorithms play in our important work. So to discuss all of these, I'm pleased to be joined by Zakhar Protsiuk. He's Chief Operating Officer at the Kyiv Independent, and he leads reader revenue, marketing, product, and e-commerce teams. Also co-founder and former managing editor at the Fix Media, a media about the European publishing sector. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Ms. Fauziyya Tukur, she's an investigative journalist for BBC Nigeria. Welcome to the panel, Fauziyya. She's a 2023 fellow of the WPI, and she has over a decade of experience in digital journalism, specializing in investigating disinformation campaigns across Africa for the BBC. We have Mr. Kaius Niemi from Finland. Welcome. He's a deputy CEO and partner at Milton Group, a leading communication and advisory firm with nearly 30 years of experience in journalism. He has served as editor-in-chief at Helsinki Sanomat, the largest daily newspaper in the Nordic countries. He was also a fellow, right, of the World Press Institute. And lastly, we have from the US, Mr. Griffith. Welcome. And he's a veteran audio producer and designer of radio programs and podcasts who has launched such programs as On Point and The Takeaway in the US. He's a media strategist that has worked with civics-minded journalism organizations like the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. In April, he will be launching, if not launched yet, a new model for creative journalism. And we're going to start not in a common way. We're going to start by having first Graham do a presentation for a light start of this discussion. Please, Graham.
Is this working? Yes. Okay. Faleminderit Xhemajl. And Благодаря to ABF and World Press Institute, which I had never called WPI because I basically grew up on the campus of a college named Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Massachusetts, where my father was a coach. So my background on the world comes first through sport. So I may stand up because 30 years of playing sport, the body is not quite right. Just a dasum tukvas, is that the right phrase? I'm very honored to be here with everybody. My talk to open us up is a bit of a transition. And I'd like to pretend that I just developed this talk after hearing Arwa's amazing talk. There is a connection between this. I am here, obviously, I've been here for 4 weeks. I've been spending the last 4 weeks answering the question here, Prague, Poland, with also my cousins in Napoli, who are saying, gli americani, pazzi, what has happened to America? You are crazy. And so I find myself on this, I would call it an apology tour, except as an extra medium white American, our president has submitted to people who look like me that we are no longer allowed to apologize for anything. So if I happen to say I'm sexy, that's because that's what we're supposed to say instead of I'm sorry. So I'm trying to both follow the rules and also help. So Arwa, your talk reminded me of kind of what I've been thinking about for a long time, which is the idea, and actually maybe we can get this up. We are very unpopular journalists. You ask Americans, where do journalists stand? And we're somewhere between, I would say, orcs and tax collectors, you know, in terms of what Americans think of us. But you meet them and you talk about your work and they're so thankful. So maybe we need to think about what we do rather than what we call ourselves. And Arwa, your story is your story to tell. When I heard you speaking first from the beginning, and if there's more time later, I'll tell you my origin story in journalism, what I'm doing now, which is tied to 9/11 as well. You got into journalism because of actions you wanted to take. Again, your story to tell. Although again, the directive from the president is that we are supposed to tell women what their stories are. We mansplain, manual explaining, use our hands to talk a lot. But when you talked about leaving CNN, for me, you are committing acts of journalism in your work, even if you're not called a journalist. So this is a very brief talk. Instead of a lightning talk, this is a lightning bug talk. Svetulka, Sylvia's my wordsmith here. Let's call it a Svetulka talk. And Tsevi, when we are at 3 minutes, I want you to yell out, that's 3 minutes, Gigi, okay? So I want to respect everybody's time because I'm here to listen. So what if I'm going to share some people who do professions where I think we can learn from them. These are people who are very important in my lives. They do incredible work. None of them call themselves journalists, but I think as journalists we can learn from their work. So what if we're not journalists? What if we are meteorologists? This is Nola. She's a meteorologist. She helps people decide each day, when you go out into the world, here's what you need to get through the day. It may rain, so you may need this. This is Maggie, who is a teacher. And so what if we were teachers? Our best work, we teach people, we help them understand how to move through the world. What if we, thanks to Petya, wherever you are, Petya, I still would like to interview some of these street artists here, but what if we were actually artists, and not only artists in museums, but we are artists on the street. We are putting things back to people in our community to help them understand what we're going through. And if you've not been to Sofia, this is the most creative space. No blank sheet of metal goes untouched. There are some symbols that you will not want to see, let's be honest. This is my personal chef, Elliot. He's here in Bulgaria. So what if I'm a chef? I don't just give people the food from the farm. I think about how do I give them things that make their lives better. This is one of the most important analogies for us, right? If we think we are doing our jobs by serving all the information that we've learned, and it just goes through people, and they get, potato chips. You want to serve people potato chips, they will eat the full meal. They will get nothing from it. If you can create these bao dumplings, delicious, and they give you the strength to move through the day. What if sometimes we sleep in order to process what we've learned? This is Walter. If you're up in the Kvartala, the artistic neighborhood, you might see Walter's always asleep. He's not dead. What if we actually are civil servants? I don't know if people know Leslie Knope. Americans probably do. This is somebody who probably has been fired from the National Park Service now. But what if we think about supporting public spaces and parks, the spaces that people are learning in? How do we create safe, beautiful spaces in which people can learn? What if we are, Forza Napoli, what if we are teammates and we are supporting each other and we each play a role, but the striker doesn't need to do what the center back does? What if we are pilots and we help people navigate from point A to point B? In our stories, we safely get people to a new place, someplace where they were not, and we're talking about who owns the story. Also, how do we tell the story? People should be at the end of your podcast or radio show, someplace where they're comfortable and they know where they are, and it has to be different from where they began. Arvo did that this morning for all of us, right? The storytelling with the images. We were someplace at the end of that we were not at the beginning. What if we are groundskeepers or gardeners tending to the public spaces? Because we need community. We need to be in beautiful spaces even when things are difficult. Sofia, again, an amazing city for creating spaces where people engage. Read in a park here if the sun comes out for an hour, and you will feel like you're surrounded by people who remain curious learners despite the challenges. What if sometimes we go to church? What if sometimes we have a beer? We are human. We need to do these things. And what if we are engineers? Okay, almost done. What if we are engineers? We're building, we're constructing, we're deconstructing, we're trying to build the right things. What if we are readers instead of writers at times, where we are reading so that when we need to write to your question, that we have context, we understand how we got here. And what if we are listeners? I work in audio. We need to listen. We often just create. Maria, you've had your struggles in national radio with volume and all of that, and when you don't have time to listen, you can't really speak well. And what if we are dreamers, and instead of dreaming of beefsteak, we dream of how to solve things. We dream of what's possible. What if we are musicians? The young Robert Zimmerman once said, listening to Woody Guthrie made me feel more like myself than ever before. So music has this power. How do we create sounds and music to help people? What if we are scientific thinkers where we look at problems as puzzles and challenges? And maybe most importantly, what if we are epidemiologists? Everybody should study epidemiologists. These are people who think, what makes communities unsafe? What are the vulnerable communities? How do things spread? We have demonized and politicized the people who are in the labs trying to save humanity. I mean, this is very important for the disinformation effect and Kremlin hybrid warfare to take advantage of that moment. And then lastly, it's very important that we're doing what we're doing right now. And again, thank you to the organizers. Thank you to Ivan and Maria and Zach and Camilla and people gathering. We need in this moment to gather and make eye contact and problem solve together. So, thank you.
This was really a unique way of starting our panel, and it will set up the mood, I think, of the conversation we're going to have with the panelists. I want to start with you, Zakhar. You've been working both in newsroom operations and media strategy, and how did that shape your view on who controls the news today?
Thank you. First of all, pleasure to be here. My name is Zakhar Protsiuk. I'm a CEO at the Kyiv Independent. It's a Ukrainian English language news publication out of Kyiv. We are a team of 70 people, and we are doing news not just about the war, although that's the main thing we do now, but about Ukraine overall and trying to bridge the gap between Ukraine and the world. That's our mission. In terms of who controls the news and kind of how does the landscape looks like, I think a few things that I think we just have to accept and move on. The following, right? Like, I think news media are definitely no longer a gatekeeper of information, right? That's used to be the case. No longer it is the case, and it's not gonna come back ever. I've been to many conversations when I think like a lot of news media trying to make a case for that, discuss how do we kind of get back to where we are. We're not getting back. We need to understand that the information space of influencers, creators, political actors, everyone now is a small micro nano news publication in itself, right? Like the competition space is so much different than that. So I think even kind of the question of controlling the news, I think no longer is relevant. No one controls it. Everyone creates it. That leads us to, I think, a very obvious next step. So what's our role and how are we kind of making sense in this? And the answer for me is pretty clear, is we do what others cannot do, right? We do what creators cannot do. We do what other kind of actors don't have the either resources or skills to do. Very simple examples: investigative journalism, right? Like you can be an amazing blogger who is like aggregating the news, yet when it comes to actually uncovering corruption or building like a big data journalism piece that shows the misappropriation of funds, things like that, that is just a very specific skill that we have and others don't. Hence, we need to do more of that. We need to do more on-the-ground journalism in areas where there is big risks, like during the war, right? When Russia launched a full-scale invasion in 2022, news media became the most important source of information for people, and that led like to their actions on how do you get out of the country, how do you find a shelter, right? In the moment of crisis, news media actually shines the most. So doing that kind of the ability to provide that information that others cannot is what we should do more. For me, those are kind of the very simple maxims we are trying to use. And then the next thing is, how do you then, in this new environment, make sure that you have the resources for this news business to exist? Right? That is the question that all of us ask a lot of times. We at the Kyiv Independent, so we are lucky to be funded by our readers. And it's a it's a huge honor, and I would say something that we try not to never take for granted. We have a community of 17,000 paying members, which we built over the last 3 years, and they provide 70% of our revenue. And that gives us so much independence, and I would say the ability to fall back on these communities. That is really the sense that it's hard to put it into words, but if you're able to get to that and you're able to cherish that relationship with your community, that gives you a lot of strengths. An example that we recently had is when USAID cut the funding. We were lucky not to be impacted because we didn't have any US grant money, but many media in Ukraine suffered a lot. Many lost 80%, 90% of their funding. And what we did, we actually fundraised for 3 local media on the front lines, and we asked our members, our community, to help them. And in 3 days, they raised $70,000, which we divided between those 3. So for me, that's an example of how the mix of community and the exclusive reporting that we can do is probably one of the ways how do you do media in the future.
If I can just follow up before we go to Fauziyya, you said that it's journalists do what others cannot do, the creators cannot do. But what happens, in your opinion, when the creators take your work and you only get thousands of views, let's say, and they have millions? Is it important for you for the news to get out there like that? But like you've put so much effort and money investigating a topic, and then you have the influencers, basically people see it more from them.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point, and I think it's the new reality. You cannot do much. You cannot go and like file a lawsuit. I guess that's just not gonna work. You're gonna drain yourself to death. I think the way to do it is you have to go and essentially compete with them. That's why, for example, we at the Kyiv Independent, we are present at, if you know a name of a social media, we are probably present there. We are on Mastodon, Blue Sky, Reddit, X, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and so on, because we believe that people on those platforms need to know what's happening in Ukraine, and it's of paramount importance, so we're going to prioritize that. And we need to find a way, essentially, to look cool for these communities, yet mix it with our journalism. So we had we are also on TikTok, and it's been very hard to find the right tone of voice for us to be there, because our reporting is about the suffering and about the war and about the biggest land war in Europe since Second World War, right? So that's something that people on TikTok, when they want to get entertained, often, they don't want to watch that. So finding a way to be popular there is a challenge. So for example, one thing that worked really well for us, we hired an amazing TikTok producer. She's kind of the voice of the Kyiv Independent on the platform. And the videos she's doing from time to time is like, how does like my morning routine looks like in Ukraine? And she wakes up, she's doing her like makeup, and then their air siren starts, she goes to a shelter, then comes back, and things like that, right? Like actual day-to-day life in Ukraine, which is very often hard for people to imagine, because there is like, the wars in Middle East are not the war we have in Ukraine. It's a functioning state attacking a functioning state. It's a different type of war. It's more deadly. I want this to be clear. It's probably more than 1 million people died between Ukraine and also in Russia. And so many hundreds of thousands of civilians died from Ukraine. It's very deadly, but at the same time, it's different because I live in Kyiv, right? And I have a mix of, regular, comfortable taxi ride to the office and a filter coffee, and an air siren in the night and a drone attack, right? And I do exist in this state, and it's not how you imagine, for example, it when you would watch it like a regular war movie. But at the same time, my experience in Kyiv is very different from experience of a person who is closer now to the front line. For example, in Kherson, it's a big city, it's 500,000 people, where the FPV drones and artillery shells are in the range of it, and literally Russians are hunting people down, like on TV buses and on buses and so on. Life there is completely different. Ukraine is a big country. So my point is kind of we need to find a way to share this with people who is outside of Ukraine and package it in a way that is interesting for them. It's not easy, but we try our best.
Thank you very much. Fauziyya, you work for BBC, you've been engaged with BBC, which is, let's say, the epitome of what is called traditional media or mainstream media, or if you would ask President Trump, dying media. For that, how can it compete with the social media disinformation, often very helped by the disinformation coming from AI as well?
I don't know, but the BBC has evolved a lot, not just the BBC. I think traditional media has evolved, and there's this blurred line now between traditional media and social media. The BBC is on social media, on basically all forms of social media. The BBC is on TikTok. And part of that is because we want to attract the young audiences. We realize that the young people that we're trying to target do not have the attention span to read long news articles. They do not even have the attention span to watch 3-minute videos. So we now have TikTok videos that are 30 seconds long, just so we can give them what they need, just so we can give news in bite-sized pieces. But that too is a problem, I think, because how do you give news in 30 seconds? You know, what do you tell in 30 seconds? But that's what the audience wants. And in this era of disinformation and misinformation, you want to debunk that viral misinformation. You want to debunk that viral disinformation campaign. You want the audiences to watch your investigation and watch the steps that you followed, the processes that you used to debunk that misinformation. How do you tell that in 30 seconds? But what do we do about it? There's nothing we can do, because that's how it has become, that's how it has evolved, that's how it has changed. And we see a lot of creators, just as Zakhar has said, you know, competing with major news organizations like the BBC. And something that I'm seeing becoming increasingly popular, at least in the region that I come from, is major news organizations hiring influencers and content creators to become journalists, or at least to become presenters or hosts of certain shows, just so people are able to watch and consume news just the way they would watch and consume content on social media. I don't know if that is the solution. I don't know if that's going to solve the problem, but I think it's one way to do it, and it has been effective. At least in Nigeria, some major news organizations have done that. They've hired people with huge followings on Twitter or Instagram to be writers, to be podcast presenters, to host major programs on their platforms. And they do attract the people that are being targeted. They do. Yeah, I have a problem with that personally, but if it's working for newsrooms, then it is. And then you spoke about AI, which is, of course, huge. And I think the pace at which AI is going, the newsrooms have to adapt quickly. And I know that there are some concerns about, ethics and that sort of issues around ethics and truth. But AI is here to stay. There's nothing we can do about it. It is here to stay. And if major news organizations or traditional media organizations do not adopt AI now, then the creators and the influencers and everyone else that has become a gatekeeper is going to do that, and it's going to be a major problem, especially with disinformation, misinformation, and conspiracy theories. Because in regions like Africa, where a lot of people can't tell, what is, for example, AI is still new all over the world, but in places like Africa, where literacy levels are very low, someone would not be able to tell what is AI generated and what is not. And the way AI is evolving and becoming more and more sophisticated, the newsrooms have to adopt ethical AI solutions as quickly as possible.
Can I also do a short follow-up? BBC in Nigeria, when people see the name, are they entitled to trust more? Because like in this region here in Western Balkans, we have Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, in Ukraine as well, which people tend to, when they do the news, it is something that is verified, that is, correct. So does this help BBC being such a big name and being British in any way for people to trust more the news there?
No, it's tricky. A lot of people don't understand how the World Service works. The BBC World Service, I mean. And to your typical African Nigerian, it doesn't make sense that the British government would just want to set up its office in Nigeria or in Nairobi and to give you news free. And we have language services. The BBC has language services across Africa, a lot of them. And it doesn't really, and especially with the colonial history that we have with Britain. So it's kind of hard for your typical African to understand why the BBC is in Africa and trying to give it news in its own language. In terms of trust, I would say it has really reduced. The BBC used to be quite huge. In Africa, it is still huge. Radio is still big in Africa. In Nigeria, it is. The World Service serves millions of people across Africa. But I would say in terms of trust, there's a reduction in trust, but people still listen to the BBC. People still go to the BBC as a trusted source of news, much more than other media organizations. And I would say it's in Nigeria, at least in northern Nigeria where I come from, it's almost become part of the culture. The BBC House of Service is huge, and it's kind of like a movement and a culture there.
I understand. Thank you very much, Fauziyya. Kaius, I want to ask you about how do you see the lines, are they blurring between what is journalism, what is PR, and advocacy?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think when looking back at the time when being an editor-in-chief, more than 10 years ago, there was this discussion that like the traditional media is not there anymore, so it's going to lose the game. That was the really the era when the GAFAs, the Google, Facebook, and the other platforms were coming for the first time, and the social media was getting big, and everybody were saying that there's like no need for the newspapers anymore, no need for any sort of fact-based information, because like the civil societies are going to take over, and it's going to be all social media. And then a couple of years later, it changed quite dramatically. Suddenly, the traditional media was again a very big player. But why? Because the social media was just delivering the news through their own platforms. So that was, again, the media was big again. And now we are a little bit somewhere in between now. Just trying to understand the whole picture and the whole media space evolution, I think one needs to talk about a couple of big megatrends. One is the technological change and the technological disruption, which has led to the media industry and crisis and the business model crisis, and then it has also led to some sort of gain by these networks, algorithmic networks that are in a powerful role. And then you have the other megatrend is political polarization anywhere in the world, which creates these people and politicians and other power players that are using these kind of a post-truth strategies. They're gaining a lot of traction and gaining a lot of impressions in the social media by telling lies, attacking media, and using different kinds of shady means in order to cash, this visibility. And then it has led also to the crisis of expertise. So you might be a professor in the university, but you are questioned that you don't know anything because anyone is actually as expert as you are. So all these together, it boils down to the question that are the societies leaning towards fact-based information? And it's not only about media, it's about the societies at large. And then coming back to the question is that like we need very strong traditional media, which is modern. And then we also need, you know, whether it would be PR agencies or anyone else to be working in an ethical manner. Also saying that like, you know, that the press has got like their role. They need to question and make hard questions for anyone. And so also the advocacy part needs to sort of like fulfill fulfill the expectation that media is an important and vital institution for any open democracies to be able to operate. And I think, you know, the big question now is that are we having new media appearing, new media titles appearing vis-a-vis the old traditional media? And if the answer is no, we are in a big trouble, because we need to sort of like find new business models to have private equities investing to journalism, to use the technology in a most sophisticated and creative way, and to make the fact-based journalism interesting and vital part of also vital in a business way as well. And I can't see that happening too much. In Finland, where we still have very strong press, we are not having decent amount of new titles appearing. We don't have so many, you know, media startups, even though there might be even money to invest for them.
If I can add a bit of hope and support your point, I do agree, and I think when we think about the fall of trust in legacy media, we think that it usually goes to, you know, like this podcast dudes like Joe Rogan and so on, which is true, that's what happens, but they actually can be also different. And I think actually the Kyiv Independent is the one who benefited from the loss of trust in the US. So we have around probably like close to 10 million people will reach each month across our website, newsletter, social media, and close to half of it is people from the United States. And I think what we notice is actually they do go to us more like more because they lose trust in, you know, in Washington Post, in Fox News, and so on and so on. And for them, we are this kind of, you know, funky people from Kyiv running their operation during the war and giving them on the ground information. And then we do win from that moment in a way. So you can build new startups based on ethical journalism now, and you can even find the business model and use this problem that we have now of loss of trust. It is possible, and I think just looking this from the pessimistic perspective is kind of, we lose the agency, to be honest, if we do it. So I agree with you.
There is this interesting, you know, feature that, like, you know, we have many, you know, half of the magazine titles have, you know, just vanished in Finland since 2007. If we're looking at like the editorial rooms that are like, you know, producing these really nice magazines, still there, you know, some of the subscribers, I mean, the average age of the subscribers might, you know, start with 7 or 8. And if I would be a journalist in that kind of a media, I would really make hard questions for the business side of the paper, and also the editors. That what's our future within 5 or 10 years? You know, because that's not very sustainable. So, you know, allocating resources, you know, in these media houses is very important to be able. I mean, if you have a big media corporation, you know, just to make sure that, like, you know, there are new titles, new ventures being founded, and allocating, you know, really good journalists, you know, to these new ways of working. As actually, like Fauziyya, what you were telling, that, like, you know, BBC is doing a lot of stuff in other means, you know, in social media and some. That's very important.
Can we go to US, Graham, and ask you, out of what we discussed till now, what's the position of journalists and media in US? Is it now dangerous to be a journalist in the US with tech platforms basically bowing to the new administration, Twitter X being owned by Mr. Musk, and Facebook now cutting the fact-checking all around the world? How is it? Who is telling the story in the US?
Well, You know, I don't want to be only in a negative space on this, right? So let's just put some of this into context. The danger to the practice of journalism is very high. And the danger to some individual journalists is quite high. And so my hope is that, an expectation, I think one of the things that has been vastly underreported is how many Americans have taken to the streets since what I call the Black Friday, and others call Black Friday for Journalism, January 24th. And I shared this to say, partly my first 2 weeks in Europe, people were saying, how come there's no protests? So in some ways, journalism as a practice is really broken when people in Europe, and actually I answered that question the way I do. I put on my fake academic hat, because I've had a couple of opportunities to have research at University of Michigan and Wesleyan University where I've studied crisis journalism, why are we failing? And so I would start to answer that question, here's what's going on. And then 3 weeks ago, the report came out about how many people have actually been protesting, and I realized I had misframed, I was falling for a false frame. And so in many ways, the dangers are really to the practice. Because the danger to journalists, individual journalists, I mean, I'm really glad that PBS Frontline is going to show this documentary on Christo Grozev, you know, so, because we're here in Bulgaria and Americans do not listen to what's happening here. So this is maybe hopeful. And I will say that, again, with my social scientist hat, I have to look at where are there possible, what we call positive deviants. When everything looks bad, what is actually working despite this? And so the dangers to the world because of American decisions are, as everybody here knows, you don't need me to tell you, are quite significant. And it is about, I mean, when I'm listening to you, Fauziyya, one thing that comes to mind is, you know, BBC's sounds and BBC's investments in social media and the good and the bad of it, right? So the BBC, and let's include the New York Times, which I will not put on the BBC level, but places that are deciding we actually need people to stay with us instead of going to the platforms. That instinct is actually quite important. At the same time, 2 years ago, I was invited to listen in with the European Broadcast Union's innovation group, which are the most talented people you will ever meet. And I played the American fool, which is now my role, and said, all of this is pointless if we don't think about the platforms. They were spending 2 days. How do you navigate Google? The biggest investment was in connected cars. This is the fall of 2023, autumn of 2023. I don't like to use the word fall because it hits too close to home right now. But you know, for me, it was, Mamma Mia, what are you doing? And so I said, you know, solutions come from simple next steps and big ideas. And so I stood up and I said, what needs to happen is all that sweet Eurovision money needs to be invested in a platform that has transparency, because the reality is Europe has been bad for the world for the longest time, you know, better than anybody. And now Europe is critical for the world. And the EU, I appreciate the bureaucracy because it protects things from going too far. And yet, ask all of my Bulgarian colleagues here who are trying to do good work and treated like third-class citizens by people in Brussels, we need the EU to do something quite big. So imagine if the EU created a Wikipedia for journalism where everybody, all of the organizations that have transparent processes, and I think we need to be using the word transparency more in the digital age. There is no objectivity. Humans are not object. I completely agree with Aru. We need to stop talking about neutrality and objectivity. This is easy to recognize. These are constructs that people use against us and we use to prevent ourselves from doing the work we need to do. But there can be objective processes. And so as a consumer, like, again, what can I do? What can we do? What can the world do? As a consumer, I am increasingly looking at what can I know about this process? It's like, why would you read a history book that doesn't have footnotes? Why go to a website that doesn't have links and doesn't give credit to where the ideas come from? So that's the simple next step as a consumer. We can all do that. as a community, we really do. Zakhar, yes, of course, be on TikTok, and we know nothing about TikTok's API. So we all need to measure, like, why are we on these platforms, and check, is it actually doing it? NPR was shut off of Twitter and did not go back on Twitter, and there's a scholar in Switzerland, Gabe Bullard, who studied the impact, 0 impact. So each person I have to ask you, why are you on Twitter? You don't have to have an answer that satisfies me. You do have to have an answer. Why are you on TikTok? Have your answer and test that answer.
Thank you, Graham. And to that point, EU is trying to save Radio Free Europe right now, which is so important in this region, by funding it because of its...
It has to happen, and Norway needs to give the money. I mean, right now, April, I'll listen from this point forward, right? This is a critical moment for action. If we look historically at these periods, this is a moment where there is a slight pause in the destruction. Today will be a very bad day for public broadcasting in the US, based on this morning's latest trove of misinformation. This is the moment for Norway, Switzerland to invest and recognize that give Trump the win. Say, you were right. This should be Europe's. Here you go. Here's your wall of receipts is full of not true information. Here's money for you, and don't spend the American salaries on and take over RFE. And if it doesn't happen soon, it will be too late.
I'm going to open it for questions. We're in the last 15 minutes of this panel, and who will be the first one to do a question? There, please, first.
Back to influencers you're talking about, are they creators of the content, or also they're only publishers? And if BBC has does the BBC has a formal agreement with them, and what this agreement requires from them to do? And what rules to follow?
Okay, just to be clear, I wasn't talking about the BBC when I said they hire content creators to become journalists. I was talking about other media organizations in the region. I haven't seen the BBC do that yet, but major media organizations in Nigeria and across Africa have been doing that. So hiring content creators with huge number of followings or with influencers to become journalists or host certain programs on their digital platforms. And I'm not sure of the kind of agreement they have, but these media organizations try to make them journalists, which they are not. But I think the idea behind it is to take their followers along to bring with them to the media organizations, because I think a lot of media organizations are obsessed with numbers, with the analytics of how many people are following us, how many people are clicking on our news, and that sort of thing. And I think that's the whole idea of it, but also to be able to tell stories in such a way that young audiences that these organizations are trying to capture and target are drawn to their content. So that is the whole idea of it. But I'm not sure of the kind of agreement that they have with these content creators. But I've seen a lot of influencers and content creators become journalists in the region simply because they have a huge number of followings, or simply because they are influencers and people like them and listen to them on social media.
Kaius?
Yes.
And do they only distribute or both? Create and distribute content?
Yes, create and contribute, yes.
Okay. But, okay.
I think she has a follow-up question.
They are not, how you are sure that they meet the high professional requirements to create the content?
I think
to keep following the high standards of the profession, I mean.
That is the problem. Like I said, they are simply hired for the fact that they are influencers. They're not journalists. They're not trained journalists. Simply because they're influencers, they are hired to do the work of journalists. And that is the problem. And it is part of what we're discussing today as to, who tells the story. Influencers competing with media organizations, and media organizations depending on these influencers or content creators to tell stories.
Thank you.
I think this is a running contest, between trustworthy media and other players. And so it really is a question that how visible those trustworthy brands are everywhere. So being, on the social media platforms, it can be very vital in order to the younger people to understand that, okay, there are these brands. If I look at this from the Nordic perspective, there has been a so-called destination strategy being implemented, which means that, the bigger media players, such as, my former newspaper, Helsingin Sanomat, or Dagens Nyheter in Sweden or so, have not been really willing to play the aggregation game. It has, so not much like of the links have not been provided to Google News or other players. Rather, we have expected the readers to come to our using our app and using our website. And this is very important because it has got a straightforward and clear-cut correlation to the trust of media. So in those countries where there's no destination strategy being implemented and people are reading their news through aggregators, the trust in media is much lower. And so I think, it's playing that game, isn't it? Yeah.
And of course, the hyper-visibility thing. We are so obsessed with visibility and hyper-visibility and the metrics. So we see those content creators or influencers as giving us that, or giving media organizations that, I don't want to say us, but giving media organizations that, and like you said, without a clear destination or goal to them, that is just what matters.
This pairs with the trap of this devotion to efficiency and volume, right? So part of our failure is we've chosen volume. We're trying to compete. And if you are measuring your success, and of course, Peter may speak to this in the next panel because he's an expert on this, but when you're trying to build sustainable businesses, you do have to figure out how to attract the funding. We do need to decouple funding from volume and attach it to impact. And in the podcast space, we have this great disruption that everybody's panicking about, but is an opportunity where we're now seeing that the way advertisers were measuring their payments were based upon downloads, and the actual number of listens is, in some cases, you can have a podcast that's 100,000 downloads and 7,000 listens. Is this bad news? The good news of that is we can actually measure how long people listen for. And so if you have a podcast and you only have 1,000 people, and they listen to 85% of a podcast, which is considered a complete listen, you should be going to people and saying, the people who do listen are truly engaged. So there's a collective need to shift because we cannot win the volume game. And what you're describing is people thinking, oh my gosh, how many followers do we have? How many users do we have? There is no way to beat there's also no way to control the algorithm, so you chase it in one way and it changes.
If I can add, make this discussion maybe a bit more spicy, disagree with you a bit and say that, look, there is a limit to the value in just having the engaged audiences that like you, read you, and yes, they will pay you for subscription. But then what happens, and I have quite a different lens because I think a lot from the perspective of how our journalism is consumed versus the Russian propaganda that is out there, right? The Russian strategy is to fill the gaps. That's how they do it. Like the budget of Russia today alone is $1 billion+. It's bigger than the budgets of all media in Ukraine combined. It's only one organization, right? So you understand, and they are like, if you would go, for example, it might look like the narrative, for example, in UK looks pretty good, but then go to Korea, for example. It's a country that supports Ukraine, yet the amount of Russian misinformation is so high that you would be surprised. And go to Africa, go to South America, right? They are filling those gaps. So we, as the Kyiv Independent, we have a mission to, if we can, in any way possible, to fight for alternative, actually objective journalism in those places. We will do it. So we are on all social media, we are on all aggregators, on Yahoo, MSN, we sell our journalism, we give it for free. As long as it reaches, we give it for free to other journalists and have this role of other media using our journalism as a I like to think about this as a kind of bullshit filter. So when they go and report on what's happening in Ukraine, they read what they see on our website, and then they can use this information to go and proceed further. I think it's really important to fill those gaps. Otherwise, others will fill it. Trust me. Like, they will do it, and they will have much bigger resources than independent media have. And then what it leads to, I could give you one example, right? On Sunday, Russia launched an attack on the city of Sumy in Ukraine with cluster munitions and killed 35 people. It was a double tap attack. Double tap means there is one rocket attack, and then after that, when people come to rescue, there is another attack comes. So it kills those who go to rescue. And then Mr. Trump said, "I've been told it's been a mistake." He's been told by whom? A very simple question. It's been told by his circle. And his circle is, I'm sorry, very infiltrated with Russian propaganda at this point. For example, his special envoy, Steve Witko, just came back from Moscow and said that it's great. We are discussing 5 territories now. You know what these 5 territories are? This is 4 oblasts of Ukraine and Crimea Autonomous Republic of Ukraine. They are discussing it, and they feel it's great. And then this guy, his high representative, friend of Trump, said that, oh, like, there was a referendum on those territories. They want to be Russian. They don't even control these territories yet. They only control part of these territories. What kind of referendum are you talking about? Millions of Ukrainians fled those territories when they occupied them, right? And that's an example of Russia filling the gaps and then targeting decision makers. If we do not offer an alternative, we will be in a bubble, maybe with some money in it, but it will be a bubble.
Thank you, sir. There's a question here.
Hi. My name is Iskra Angelova. I was having my talk show on Bulgarian national television for 14 years. It was banned by censorship in Bulgaria. As probably Graham knows, our level of freedom of speech is not very high here. Actually, we're the last in European Union in terms of freedom of speech. But now I work for a very free online media outlet, and we are covering the war in Ukraine, I think, really in depth, doing actions about it, having it as our main topic. And what we've noticed is, as Zakhar said, that the gap is very, very, very fastly full by a very, very well-paid Russian propaganda, because when the Ukrainian war started 3 years ago, 90% of Bulgarians were supporting Ukraine. Now they're like 40. So, which means free media in Bulgaria, let's say it out loud, are online now. They were somehow funded and supported by the United States of America, some of them. Now, when the United States of America successfully, looks like destroyed democracy in 40 days, there is no more funding probably coming to Bulgarian free online media. So what are we going to do now, since this is our life on stake? Not only our life as me, mother, journalist, person, you, but as Graham said, the alibi that they're using against us is that we have to be neutral. We have to show the both points of view. And all Bulgarian official big medias are doing this all the time, which means when you have a criminal and you have a victim, you are showing both sides. When you have a pedophile and you have a victim, you're showing both sides, which is outrageous. So what are we going to do now? We don't have anymore the big, huge democracy. Actually, this conference is showing that we do still, and thank you very much for having us here. But we don't have it. We don't have the financial support, and they do. So what is our mission? What are we allowed to, what we have to do now?
We're in our last 5 minutes. Who want to take it? If you can make it short,
because
I want to
very
have
quick.
another.
Yeah, let's talk more. I think the reality is if you try to do what they're doing, I can tell you over 30 years of watching organizations do this in the US, you don't end up winning. So to say, to follow that lead and react is a mistake. I think we should talk about, because I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I really appreciate the work you're doing, and the decision you made, right? You chose to not continue, and Maria, like the people here, the journalists are amazing who have chosen to things are different. So I'm not going to just show up and do the same routine. I mean, we should all be doing that right now, but we should talk about the question is how do you circumvent that, because you can't react to it. I actually agree with Zakhar in many ways. I'm working with Google, I'm working with Spotify. I'm trying to figure out how do we make sure that we make these safer spaces and open them up. At the same time, there is no news gap. There is no gap because there are no holes. But nobody wakes up with a news hole. This is a constant stream right now. So it's not as though, so filling the gap, I think they will always be able to fill the gap. The question is, how do we stand out? How do we make your work? We need your work to show up in search. And I will, like a later conversation, if RFE goes down, the Bulgarian work will be large language models that continue to surface the Russian propaganda. And so we need to solve this by circumvention.
Thank you. One last question there, if we can get the microphone.
My question is to Graham. The last photo that you showed us, there was a sign, it was written community. Do you think that the American media, American journalists have enough resistance to oppose and to create community against those forces that are trying to oppose the new correct narrative?
Yeah, I will follow Xhemajl's directions and be very short on this one, which is, this is an and, not a but. And the way to ask that question for me is how might we? Because working in audio and radio, the simplest way to do a show is to have debate and ask yes/no questions, and at the end of it, it's like the chef who's only serving potato chips, right? So really, for us, my answer, can we not, is me wasting even more of your time, right? The question is, how might we? And so my work will be with other people. How might we do this? Let's problem solve, let's work together. How might we? We need to.
Thank you, Graham. We don't have more time, unfortunately. I don't see any hands either. So I'm very thankful to everyone for joining in this panel. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you.
And thank to everyone. I pass the torch to Zach.